Hey everybody, Eli from Elfbait. Thanks for coming back. At the end of the adventure recap for session 2, I had been talking about something that got cut off, and I wanted to kind of touch back on that. So what I was starting to talk about is something that has come up in running both these two different games, the Sunday game and the Monday game. But I've run into it in the past, and it's something that can be a bit tricky if you're still just kind of figuring out what's going on as a DM. And really that particular point is, not just encounter size. Obviously, things like challenge rating and all of that are really easy guides for combat encounters, but also what kind of hazards, trips, traps and tricks and puzzles and the like that you can throw at parties based on their size and relative ability. And that became really apparent recently when I was running the Sunday game, and I was thinking about how when I was designing the dungeon to take that particular party on versus my Monday game, which at the time was two active players with a possible third, and now it's up to 4 with a possible fifth. It might go a little smoother, but so at the time I was having to write with a bit of a concern in my mind, and that was really when you're dealing with a small party. You can't really throw the same kind of things at a small party that you would at a larger party. You could, but if your goal is to make a fun game for everybody, you're really going to end up failing if you try to just universally throw the same tricks at both groups. If you're going for absolute simulationist play and you really want to do that, and your party and your players are cool with that, then by all means go ahead. I mean, it's your game and it's their game, so if you guys are cool with doing that. But for the most part, in general, you're going to want to scale things back. So as an example from the two groups recently, in the Sunday game, while they're going after the Serpent Sorcerer's Sanctuary, or the Serpent Sorcerer, that long hallway that they were going down as they went deeper into the Sanctuary, with the magical effect that was inducing kind of sort of a stuporous exhaustion type of a rule up on the party if they fail to save. Now, I felt reasonably confident and comfortable throwing that in early in the dungeon because that party is 5 people. Chances are only a few of them are going to fail the save, which leaves the other ones to protect them. And also, it was not just a trick or a trap. It was also a chance to get information in the adventure. If you remember from the previous video, that while they were in that stupor, those who were affected by the stupor had a word come into their head. The word was Athrax, and none of them keyed in on that. None of them figured it out, but that was the password to get past the snake guardian at the doors that were at the end of that hall in that chamber. None of the party bothered to think of saying the word, even though I was very specific to hand it out. But kind of going back to what I was saying, that sort of an encounter, that sort of effect on the party that could leave party members useless. I mean, if they hadn't snapped out of it, or weren't snapped out of it by the rest of the party before that snake encounter, those party members who were affected would have been at a disadvantage for a good chunk of the combat. If I had thrown that against my Monday night group, something similar, with only 2 of them in the party at the time, or let's say you're running a solo game, that really takes some doing. Either you have to just completely write out stuff like that, or you have to handle it differently, because the chances that it becomes much more critical. A single save fail in that case is going to leave the party down to 50%. So if you're writing that into an encounter like that, or a puzzle or trap like that into an adventure, you do want to go ahead and either use it differently. Maybe that is it's sort of a video game, and maybe that's a lead into a cut scene where the party's supposed to be taken out, and then they wake up elsewhere, and that's where the rest of the adventure continues. They wake up, they're maybe at the heart of the dungeon and now have to fight their way out rather than actually having fought their way in. Maybe the dungeon was a ruse and there's nothing for them in the dungeon, but the dungeon was actually just a MacGuffin to get them going on the adventure, and the adventure actually lies elsewhere. But getting them in there was a way to get them into the hands of whoever it is that's going to send them. That's a way of reframing an encounter like that to deal with the smaller party. The other, like I said, really though, if you're not going to do that, and it's kind of hard to do that sometimes you just want a straightforward adventure, avoid traps and tricks that are going to really disable all of your party. I mean, it's always a possibility, even with a large party, that everybody's going to fail their save, but it's less likely. As long as you've got one party member who's still up, a larger group can be reasonably sure that they're going to get past, a non-combat encounter, and you can always wait. I mean, after that point, they could have just rested or something. So this is something that you're going to face in other situations too, though. Combat encounters, aside, those kind of factor themselves out and figure themselves out. You want to avoid traps and tricks that are going to disable the entire party. If they're going to, or affect the entire party. If they're going to affect the entire party, make them less lethal. Make them expend some of the small party's resources, but not completely undo them. A pit trap. Cool. Everybody may fall in the pit trap. Instead of having it do massive fall damage, have it do 1d4, 1d6, especially in even in an early adventure, that's a lot, because that's 50% or 75% of the hit points of most adventures at first level. But if you do like 1d4 or something like that, you're gonna hurt them. They're gonna look out for traps, and they're gonna know that the place is trapped again. If you're going to have magical effects, tone them back. If an effect says, if you're thinking feeble mind, or you're using a published book that says feeble mind because of some sort of magical ward or something, instead of feeble mind, sub it in with another spell, a slowing spell, maybe sleep for X amount of time. So the party goes to sleep. There's then a possibility of a random encounter, but maybe not. Or you can even pare it back from there. Stinking cloud. It makes the party smell, so they're less likely to surprise an enemy. Maybe use alarms that set off advanced warning for encounters along the way, instead of that potential to have your party without the ability to do anything. Because once your players start seeing that you're just taking them out through these random occurrences, they're going to start backing off, and they're really not going to be as into it if they're feeling like they're being crippled and hamstrung by what are really supposed to be obstacles, but obstacles that are able to be overcome. In my experience, most traps in dungeons are generally not designed to kill the party. They're designed to injure the party or make them expend resources otherwise. You're gonna have to use your burning oil to get through whatever. You're going to have to use an iron spike to pin that hinge. You're gonna have to use something. You're gonna have to use a spell to levitate over the pit. Now, you may, and at that point, it's not an option necessarily to rest throughout the dungeon. Also, keep in mind too that when you're dealing with a smaller party, the resources of the individual character count for more in that party. So, again, when you're talking about making them expend resources, make sure that you're making them expend them at a rate that they can get through the rest of the dungeon. You either have to have short dungeons, which is always a good way for smaller groups, and in a lot of ways, short dungeons are more realistic. Very rarely can I think of a situation realistically where you're gonna have some massive, expansive cavern network or dungeon where you're gonna have to explore through, and you have to go through every room. Also, if you're going to be dealing with a smaller party, expect them to be much more goal-oriented and not exploration-minded. They know that they're fragile being a small party, and so they're probably going to go in, get it, and get out. And so that also, why make a giant dungeon if your party is going to go in and get it and get out? You can be pretty linear in dungeons like that, and still have it be fun as well. So you're really looking at trying to make sure that you're pacing your encounters and scaling your traps and your puzzles and the size of your dungeon to fit smaller parties. Now, when I wrote Val Morgan's Ledger, which is the adventure I'm running for my my Monday game, I should say, I wrote it expecting at the time to have 4 players. Now, 3 I could get by with. Because I know the experience level of the players, not the characters, is good enough to carry that through. That would be my brother and my friend Derek, who've just been playing pretty much as long as they could. So when it came down to 2 players, I didn't retool the adventure because there was this expectation that we'd still be getting a 3rd player. But that then led to another thing that you're going to expect to see if you have smaller parties. They're going to spend more time planning. They really are going to go ahead and not want to just charge into the dungeon. They're going to want to talk to people in towns. They're going to gain intel. They're going to maybe scout the site. They're going to talk to people, gather supplies, spend some time figuring out their best options. So they're going to be a little bit more of an optimizer type of crew when they're trying to go into these into dungeons with a smaller party, and that's not bad. It actually kind of allows for a lot of role playing. In this case, my first 2 sessions were nothing but really role play with a couple of isolated combats, because Derek and Craig weren't ready to jump into the dungeon with just 2 of them. So now that I've got my new players, new regular players, and we're up to 4, they're in the dungeon, and the dungeon is what it is. It's as I wrote it, and we're actually kind of getting our first taste to see how balanced the new challenge rating system is for 5th edition. Never been an entirely huge fan of challenge rating, simply because I feel like it's overly fiddly. But I usually look at challenge rating and use it as a guide. But so just kind of again, when you're dealing with smaller parties, keep in mind that they're going to be looking for economy in their actions and their supplies and their other resources. But also as a DM, you need to economize your encounters and stage those encounters and pace those encounters and scale those encounters in a way that is going to challenge your party still, but not with as great a possibility of massively hampering what's already a very hindered group. 2 players, 2 characters, 1 character, a solo character, really tricky to get around without messing it up. But it can be done. You just have to spend a little bit more time thinking about what's going to make an interesting encounter and how the usual suspects in a dungeon can be retooled to fit that smaller party count. Less deadly traps, more hindering traps, traps that puzzles that need to be solved that don't have deadly consequences for fail, but maybe just force the players to find an alternate route. They can't figure out the door puzzle. Okay, don't have big cutty scythes come down and cut them in half, but maybe failing the puzzle means they have to look around and find a secret drawer that you've put in there, or find a back way through the outside of the crypt. Maybe failing the door puzzle doesn't kill them, but drops them into a different place in the dungeon. So now they're disoriented, now they're hampered, but they're still in one piece. Maybe it's not even a drop. Maybe, it's kind of an evil mastermind. You can just kind of see the original creator of the dungeon kind of sitting back, Mwah! As they slide, as, the floor, tilts down at an angle and slides them into a lower chamber before it closes up. Now they're deep in the heart of the dungeon. They don't know where they are in the dungeon, but they're not down hit points. They're not down spell components. They're not down equipment. But they have been. It's still been fun. It's still been a magical or cool effect. It cinematically is probably pretty neat. And now they're challenged still, but they're not put in an unfair situation where they really are feeling like, well, crap, there's half my spells, until we get a chance to do a long rest, we're dead. So, that's kind of just what I wanted to chat on. That's where I was kind of going at the end of that video that got cut off. But again, thanks for checking in. Leave comments down below. I'm looking for comments. Comment, and if you want to hear me talk on stuff that's non-recap related, and you have topics that you just maybe want to hear me talk about or my take on it, let me know, and I'd be happy to go ahead and do a video on those. Having fun doing these still, so get out and game.